Everybody wants to know the secret of life. We know that at some point something happened and life started. But what happened exactly? What was the principle that originated life? Generally, we have two answers to this fundamental question. One is religious, God created life and man. The other one is scientific, and we can find it in the Neo-Darwinian Theory of Evolution, according to which life was originated more than 4 billion years ago. So you can choose science or religion. However, the real situation is not so simple. In this video, we are going to tell you why. We are curious, we are looking for the reasons, we want to find the truth. But we tend to forget that truth starts with ourselves. Look behind the mirror and find the path. In his book, The God Delusion, perhaps the most well-known Neo-Darwinian biologist, Richard Dawkins, depicts with a telling metaphor how life started. Imagine a junkyard where every part that is necessary for an operable Boeing 747 can be found. Then imagine a hurricane that swoops through the junkyard and leaves an airplane ready to fly. The chance for life in the primordial soup more than 4 billion years ago was even smaller than for an operable Boeing assembled from some leftover junk after a hurricane. Dawkins still claims that it's exactly what happened, and it's exactly how life was originated. There was so much time and the never-ending primordial soup was so vast that it still just happened without any divine intervention. It was a metaphor to shed light on the Neo-Darwinian answer. But now the question is, what are the hard empirical evidences that it's based on with which a scientific answer can be formulated? Because everybody knows that aircrafts are not created by random hurricanes, so we have to ask what the ruling Neo-Darwinian theory tells us about the origin of life based on hard empirical evidences. According to the Neo-Darwinians, there's only one fundamental mechanism in evolution, and it is, of course, the Darwinian process of natural selection. It is the driving force behind the environmental adaptation of living beings. Every other process, like genetic drifts or migration of populations, is based on this fundamental process. Even the well-known random mutations are only additional explanations of how new variants are created during natural selection. So what is exactly the mechanism of Darwinian natural selection? On one hand, during inheritance, new variants are created by mutation. And on the other one, there are generally, but not necessarily, limited environmental resources. These two factors generate the selection race among the different variants. The consequence of the process is that generally those variants survive that can utilize the limited environmental resources more successfully. The others die, or at least do not leave behind so many capable offsprings. With this mechanism, Darwin successfully explained how new life forms are created from old ones. Now we understand everything about the origin of life, don't we? If not, let's ask for some help from Charles Darwin himself. In the last sentence of his book, The Origin of Species, he concludes the main point of his theory of natural selection in the following way. There is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers having been originally breathed by the Creator into a few forms or into one. And that, whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been and are being evolved. Okay, now we understand everything. Darwin says that the Creator breathed the powers of life into some new life forms. Oh God, what is the meaning of this? Darwin doesn't necessarily claim that God created life. He doesn't use the word creator instead of God by accident. We actually know from his other works that he probably didn't even believe in God. He speaks about a creator because he doesn't know what really originated life. He's absolutely honest with his readers about his theory of natural selection, not explaining the first form of life. The reason of this is that the Darwinian mechanism of natural selection, as we have seen, has two factors by which it works, and one of these factors is the existence of new variants that can transmit their typical features to the next generation. Since variants are living beings, it means that the Darwinian theory of natural selection presupposes life. Without any initial life form, the first factor of natural selection, and thus natural selection itself, cannot be realized. Therefore, if we accept that the fundamental mechanism of evolution is natural selection, then we also have to admit that it is logically impossible to explain the origin of life only with the Darwinian notion of natural selection. This is one of the most ignored facts of modern science. Now, it might be surprising, but the consequences of this fact are really simple. On one hand, if we accept the scientific dogma stating that the Neo-Darwinian theory is complete, then we have to say life just happened randomly. And it is exactly what the Neo-Darwinians say and always emphasize, that evolutionary development itself is a random process generated by random mutations and natural selection. Richard Dawkins' metaphor of the Boeing 747 was all about this statement. On the other hand, if we think the Neo-Darwinian theory is incomplete in its fundaments, then we have to search further and we have to find a real scientific explanation for the origin of life. We know that before the beginning of life there was the so-called primordial soup with every essential material ingredient for life. Water, sunlight, right temperature, amino acids, etc. And according to the Neo-Darwinian theory, there was nothing else. Life still started because there was so much time and the never-ending primordial soup was so vast that against all odds something just happened. A lightning bolt struck down from the skies and a random fluctuation in the primordial soup formed life. It seems that this problem is all about chances, so do we think there was enough time to realize such a small probability or not? Can you calculate the exact probability of the creation of life on Earth by a random event? Well, maybe it's not about chances after all, because the scientific answer has to be based on empirical evidences and scientific principles, and not on chances. To make it clear, our claim is that on the basis of hard empirical evidence, we have to say that it is not even possible that life was originated by a random event, because hurricanes and lightning destroy structured things, not create them. Everybody knows this simple fact because nobody has ever seen these natural forces creating things instead of destroying them. And nobody ever will, because the nature of these things is that by time they destroy every comprehensive order. This fact, by the way, absolutely complies with the physical principle that the entropy, which is the lack of order on a fundamental level, of a system is necessarily growing until an ordering principle changes the process. For example, due to an external energy flow, like sunshine on Earth, some kind of new structure, a new comprehensive order starts to grow. We can state that the physical nature of random material processes is that by time they destroy every comprehensive order which is based on our everyday and scientific empirical observations. Because in reality, it is simply impossible from a random hurricane to create an airplane unless it's some kind of miraculous wind or lightning, of course. So it's not a question of chances and thus very exact probability calculations how life was formed at the beginning. It is a question of what we have to say about the real principles of the processes on the basis of scientific evidences of these kind of processes. It is necessarily only due to logic that there's a possibility for a random hurricane to create a Boeing and that probability calculations have any meaning at all. As it is also necessary only due to logic that if I jump out the window, then there's a possibility that I will fly. If the true nature of these kind of processes, due to the physical principle of gravitation, is that I will necessarily fall, then I will fall with probability calculations in my head. Logic is not reality. In reality, it is a question of empirical evidences and not logical possibilities. Therefore, if we set aside the empirical evidences and right away start to answer the question on the basis of chances and probability calculations, then in fact we do nothing else, just making the impossible possible. With a deceptive magic trick, we substitute the logical possibility that I will fly into the place of an impossibility of reality, that I will fall. Or with a little bit harsher words, thanks to the magic of numbers and the so exact and scientific probability calculations, we start to believe in the magical power of random natural forces, or random mutations for that matter. And since winds and lightning and mutations in the DNA are strictly deterministic physical processes, even the meaning of our words, random mutations, becomes a blur, because they in fact are not random at all. This leaves us with the question, why are Dawkins and the Neo-Darwinians so scientifically look over the empirical evidences in the name of science and deal with the problem as a question of chances and probability calculations? Why we tend to believe them? First, in their view, this approach of exact probability calculations is far more scientific than what we have to say based on our natural experiences of hurricanes and lightning. Second, mainly in the 60s there have been several experiments of trying to make life in a laboratory from non-living chemicals with random events, for example, random electric discharges. But no matter how many times it has been recreated, the experiments always failed. It is serious scientific evidence against their concept, however, they simply look over it by saying, it hasn't yet succeeded, but it doesn't matter either, because the next experiment might. Third, and it's our most important point, they think in a false dichotomy. They say that there are two options, creation by higher intelligence or creation by a random material process. God or randomness, there is no third option. It means that for them, every other explanation easily becomes God himself, which, of course, cannot be accepted in scientific discourse. It's also the reason why the hard empirical evidences of the failed experiments don't matter, because if these results would be real, that would mean that life was created by God, and that is obviously not possible. But ponder a moment on what is the real difference between God as a magical factor that cannot be scientifically observed and examined, and between a supposed once-happened mysterious random event that cannot be repeated, which, by the way, also means that it cannot be observed and examined scientifically. And as we have seen, they are not even random at all, because all material processes are determined by the laws of physics. The picture of a random lightning bolt striking down from the sky and creating life, or the picture of a random mysterious hurricane sweeping through a junkyard and leaving an operable Boeing 747 ready to fly, in fact, eloquently portrays the logic and real meaning of the Neo-Darwinian concept for the origin of life. Logically, it is exactly the same as God breathing the secret power of life down from the skies. But then, what is the real scientific explanation of the origin of life, an explanation that is based on empirical evidences? That's the question which has to be finally answered in the 21st century. In this video we asked what the Neo-Darwinian theory tells us about the origin of life. We have seen that the Neo-Darwinian theory of evolution is based on the Darwinian notion of natural selection, but since any process by natural selection presupposes life, the origin of life cannot be explained by these processes. We have also seen that Richard Dawkins of the Neo-Darwinians think in a false dichotomy. The origin of life is either God or a random material process. So because the origin of life cannot be explained by natural selection, they explain by a mysterious, random, one-time event that cannot be observed and examined, and they ignore the hard empirical evidences that in nature, randomness always destroys order, not the other way around. In fact, we don't yet know what originated life. Next time, we will dive into the origin of death. It is a fearsome, mysterious topic, but we will see that death, as well as aging, has, in fact, a surprisingly simple reason. If you liked it, please leave a like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and remember, always look behind the mirror.